Good morning, everyone. It is my honor to host this call this morning. I'm Rabbi Joel Simonds, Executive Director of the Jewish Center for Justice, and we are within our 15th day of our 21 days from awareness to action, 21 days of racial justice. As we are in this context within the Jewish calendar, during this 21 days of mourning the destruction of the temple, so many generations ago. And we're taught in the Jewish tradition that the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. And we are in this moment in time in which we know that the way to combat baseless hatred is from universal love. And that love is portrayed through our actions and our activism. And so on this 15th day, it is my honor and my privilege to host a conversation with my friend and colleague and really teacher on so many issues of justice and theology, Reverend Eddie Anderson, who is the senior pastor for McCarty Memorial Church here in West Adams in Los Angeles, a organizer with LA Voice and clergy for Black Lives. Eddie, it is an opportunity, a great opportunity for us to have you today. And I really just want to ask a series of questions to give you this platform to teach us and to educate us. So I guess my first question for you, and it's somewhat of a large question, what's the meaning of this moment that we are in right now?
Thanks, Joel and the JCJ family. It's good to be with you. This moment, as I've been quoted as saying, I think is a third Reconstruction moment in our nation. It's the moment where COVID-19 really exposed the wounds of this nation that go back to 1619, when it didn't even be before. And so we saw the disparity when COVID-19 hit of the two Americas. That there is still a two Americas, as Dr. King said, and there's one America where Black folks are forced to live in, that regardless of your status in life, if you're Black, your class in life, your skin color still determines a lot about your opportunities. And so we saw that with the health disparities and Black folks dying disproportionately with COVID-19. We saw that with the first disbursement of PPP funds and a lot of Black businesses in South Los Angeles, where I live and pastor. A lot of the businesses were closed and they're not going to reopen, right? And that's just the fact of what's going to happen. And those businesses have to be gentrified and different people come in, and that's just the fact. And so we saw that. Then we saw George Floyd get lynched in the streets. We saw Ahmaud Arbery get massacred running through a neighborhood. We heard about Breonna Taylor sleeping and getting killed, and her police that had killed her are still running free. And we literally saw a third destruction moment where over 700 cities got active, rose up and said, we will not be silent anymore, that Black lives matter, that yes, we are marching because of Black death, but for Black futures, that God has called us literally with fire, right? We saw so many fires across the nation. And for me, when I saw the fires on the news, my mind immediately went back to Moses. And I said, this is the fire, right? The nation is on fire, but it is not consumed. And God is calling us from this fire and saying, the whole world has stopped. Everyone's at home. Here, I've been telling you, my people are oppressed, right? And so that's what I saw in that fire. And so even now, we see some of the aftershocks where, I just preached about this like 2 weeks ago, Joel, that when Moses was called from the fire, God tells Moses that when you go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let my people go, he'll say no. But I will compel him by a mighty hand. I will be with you. And then God tells Moses, and when you leave, you won't leave empty handed. Translate that to 2020 language, right? If Black people are on the streets saying, Black Lives Matter, stop killing us. We demand and deserve dignity. And when we break away from this oppression of white supremacy and capitalism and the racism that comes across this nation, we're not leaving empty handed. So that's why we're saying defund the police and reinvest in community. It's literally, for me, like an Exodus passage living out itself in each and every one of us. So I think this moment is the third section moment where we can really lean into our moral imagination and our moral memory and birth something new. And maybe this nation would get closer to one nation under God with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, you left me speechless, as you often do. And you know, I don't know if you know this. You know, I come on, you know, every Sunday to, you know, whenever I get that Facebook message that, you know, McCarty Memorial is coming live, I come on and I watch you preach. And you just answered my next question, but I want you to dig a little bit into this. So here you are in the moment, and you see your neighborhood and your community really suffer greater than most other communities during COVID-19. And I'm so glad you mentioned the disparities and the racism within the disbursement of PPP. And then, you know, this happens in the beginning of June. And how do you remain in the streets and carry this moment and carry this movement and provide this meaning of hope? And then, you know, without getting much rest, having to go up to the pulpit every Sunday morning and deliver a message of hope, a message, you know, for the future. I mean, you know, you and I have often talked about the prophetic tradition, right? And nobody wants to be a prophet, right? Nobody wants to deliver a prophetic message because it's one of loneliness and it's one of difficulty. How do you do this in this moment, right? How do you spend all day dehydrated in the streets, and then go to the pulpit the next morning and have to preach these messages?
Yeah, Joe, that's a great question. I would say I used to spend a lot of time writing out sermons, you know, reading the news, writing out sermons. Now that I'm living the news, the sermons are writing themselves inside of me. And so when I'm on the streets, you know, it's not lost on me that we are on the streets in the middle of a global pandemic, and that every person that is on the street for a protest is literally risking their lives to fight for their lives. And so for me, that becomes like holy and sacred, the moments we're on the streets, and to hear people really just say enough is enough. That's one. And then the other is I constantly get fed from the small wins and the small graces that show up when I'm watching the news or talking to people in the streets or being grounded. That in many ways, preaching prophetic tradition is me basically being a reporter on what I'm seeing around me. That prophetic tradition has always been telling the times as they are and then using the gifts that you have to reinterpret that for the people. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time in school, right? A lot of time in seminary, a lot of time in school studying. And so now all those books I read make sense. And I think all of us, our life experience can now be interpreted in a different way. That gives me energy. And the only thing that gives me hope is people. There's so many people in the streets that are Black, white, brown, some religious, some non-religious. It's just that part of unity. It gives you a spark that reminds you of the human soul and the power of soul force. To really push us. So it becomes the wind beneath my wings. Sometimes I'm really, really tired. My wife would tell you that I'm really, really tired, like the day before and the morning of. But the minute I stand up to preach, it's like a rush of energy shoots through my body, and it's like, all right, God, let's do it. And that's the energy. And I think all of us can find that strength in knowing that life is continually dying and being reborn, and also dying and being reborn inside of us.
I love that. And, over many text messages, we've discussed, various passages from Isaiah, right? And how they connect to the moment. You are a child of Georgia, and you are part of a tradition of pastors, schooled at Morehouse, went to Claremont Theology. You've traveled a lot and you've studied in a lot of different places. How is this moment different? And is this time different? And is this place different?
Yeah, I think this moment is different because I was talking to Reverend Lawson, a couple days ago, and I was listening in later on today. But the freedom movement that changed the conscience of America, that challenged the conscience of America, was actually relatively small, numbers-wise, right? Like at King's height, he was the most hated person in America. People called him a terrorist. When you saw the marches, it was like hundreds of people on the street, and the biggest march was the March on Washington, but that was, a big coalition of folks. And I think the difference this time around is that we have generations of people in this country who have been trained and indoctrinated in activism. So when we show up on the streets, and it was in June when we showed up in Hollywood, and literally there was like at least 30 to 40,000, maybe 50,000 people on the street. Those are bigger numbers than you would have saw in Birmingham. Those are bigger numbers than you would have saw in Selma. And in Birmingham and Selma, look what they were able to accomplish. So I think that just the numbers have really pricked the conscience of the nation and politicians. Politicians will tell you that the amount of people on the street have them changing how they think. It has given them a little more courage to do what they want to do. While the $150 million cut from the LAPD is great, it's not enough for what we actually need. We know that wasn't possible until thousands of people showed up at the mayor's house, right? Like that wouldn't have happened before. We know that in San Francisco, where they're creating new policing and getting rid of their police, trying to figure out, another system, or in New York, where they've done this work before as well, or in New York, where they're trying to cut budgets. All this is possible because people are saying there are so many people on the streets, and not just on the streets. They're calling, right? People's Budget LA, right, has literally hundreds of people calling the city about the city budget. Like, the city council will tell you, no one cared about the budget before, right? No one's looking at line items, right? The LA County just passed the first reading of Reimagine LA, which will, in perpetuity, give at least 20% of the budget to reinvest in Black communities, alternatives to incarceration, and healthcare. That would have never happened without people on the street and people reading the Times. And, Dr. King has said, it's a tragedy to be asleep during a revolution. I think people are trying to stay woke right now.
I love that. And I think your message is so powerful because, you and I in our work, and, our work is so much involved with getting people involved, right? And letting people know that their voice makes a difference. And so often it's like, I'm just one person, I'm just one vote, I'm just one call. But I think what you're telling us is that, enough of those one person, one vote, one call really creates a movement and really pushes the hand of elected officials, which I think is so powerful and so needed. And it almost goes back to your Exodus story, right? In that moment that when God calls Moses to go down, right? Moses doesn't just say, absolutely, right? Moses says, who am I? Right? Like almost like I'm this I'm the shepherd that stutters, right? Who am I to make a difference, right? And it's almost that humility. And I think everyone is asking, who am I? And yet, if enough of us hear the call, then we have a sea of who am I in that moment.
Absolutely, Joe. I mean, think about this, that the LAUSD budget around policing and LAUSD, they have said no, right? The kids showed up, testimony went happen. I know rabbis and pastors went in and said, let's cut the budget. They said no. The next meeting, because people realized I have power and agency and made phone calls and showed up again, we got a 25% cut, right? Like, that's the power of people using their voice and saying, okay, you may say no the first time, but we could be the mighty hand of God that compels you to do what needs to be done.
I love that. And if anyone ever at all doubts the power of religious voices in this moment of activism, like, spend 3 seconds with Pastor Eddie, and those doubts will go away. I know your message to this next generation, and it is powerful and it is loud, and they are hearing it. What's your message to the previous generation, to maybe the generation that calls for moderation, or the generation that calls for, small change, where we tinker around the margins? What's your message to them? What's your message to us?
Yeah, that time has always been neutral. It's the same message that prophets have always said. Time has always been neutral. And there's always been voices that say, wait. They told Dr. King, wait, we'll integrate, just wait. They told Harriet Tubman and them, wait, slavery will change in some ways, we'll reform it, right? And I think we have to ask ourselves the hard question of, what are we waiting for? And if we're waiting because we want to remain comfortability in the world that as we know it, then you need to realize that children are not the future. Children are the present. They're living with us. So how are we really making changes, and how are we using the best of the time that we have, whatever time we have left? How are we using that? Because time has always been neutral. So if you wait on time, nothing will change.
That's perfect. I mean, that's exactly what we needed to hear. You and I are about to read a book together from Eddie Glad Jr., which I'm excited to get. And the book's probably going to come. I just saw on Amazon. It's going to come to us in the next 5 days.
Cool.
What are other books, other publications that we should be reading, that you're reading, that is giving you hope? Because again, you are an eternal student. And I think sometimes when we stop being students, when we stop that process of reading new and learning new, then that small incremental change is all we're going to ask for.
Yeah, Joel, I have to be honest that in this season of protests, I haven't been reading a lot of new books. What I've actually been going back and reading is, I've had this book on my nightstand for a period of time. It's written by Nikki Giovanni. It came out last year. And it's like the 100 African-American poems. And what I've been doing before I go to bed at night, especially after the hard days, is just opening up the book, kind of like people used to do with like the Bible or the Torah, like just open up wherever it lands and read. And I've been reading the words because those are words of artists, of people who've gone before me, who were able to put in very oppressed situation imagination and paint pictures and put context and imagery. And I read those poems every night. So I would, Nikki Giovanni book. Langston Hughes has another a book, not the typical book. I believe this book is called I think it's called like The Panther or Black Panther, something like that. Another poetry book. Poetry right now has been inspiring me a lot. As Joe, I always read Howard Thurman books. Ta-Nehisi Coates has some good works that are coming out. And then I would also offer reading op-eds, right? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has written some really interesting op-eds around Los Angeles, like the jazz in Los Angeles, what it means, like experience in uh, Los Angeles. I think those have been very insightful to me, and I'm really looking forward to reading Eddie Glaude's book because I think what Eddie Glaude is doing is what we needed, what we saw 2 years ago as well, is reliving through James Baldwin, who he doesn't get his credit, man. Like James Baldwin is here. You got to think about this. Here is James Baldwin, this queer Black guy who's an intellectual, who leaves America, goes and lives in Turkey for a period of time, comes back, and he's having like debates with people with PhDs, and the way his mastery of language and analysis of the moment. If you can just read James Baldwin, it will help you just get through life. So I'm looking forward to reading what Eddie Glaude does with James Baldwin.
Amazing. And I think it's so important to remind us of poetry, right? Because, sometimes we have to connect deeper with the creativity of our time and those moments of inspiration, right? And the opportunity to really look beyond just something that is written in the news and look at it in a holier context, in a deeper context. I think when we do that, there is something that's guiding us to this moment. And speaking of this moment, a few months ago, the two of us and our communities have started to engage in this new endeavor and in this new venture together. Would love for you to talk a little bit about that and how you see that fitting into this moment, when in the context of deep investment, in the context of what it means to lift up a community.
Absolutely. We are creating, and I'm excited, we are birthing in this moment a community development corporation that will sole purpose is to really help folks recover economically, and I'll also say spiritually, because when you feed, this is where I want to, I got to lean in here around when people think of safety and people think of wholeness, it's not really police that people turn to. It's wholeness. Peace of mind is, do I have a job? Can I pay my bills? Is there food on my table? And do I have the opportunity to dream? Right? You may not achieve your dream, but just the opportunity to dream and knowing that somebody's with you creates a whole different mindset around you're safe, right? And so I think what our community development corporation, which we are birthing this moment that will cover from West Adams all the way to the VA hospital on the west side, is doing is saying to folks, you matter. It's as simple as that. Yeah, yes, Black Lives Matter and you matter, right? And it's really about your economic status and making sure that you're providing people with training if they need to retrain, because we will live in a whole new world once there's a vaccine for COVID and things are open up again. You may have been down and not been to pay your bills or rent. So what are your housing options? How can we help you meet that? Really deeply invest in you in the community, right? And I think this is basically us, both of us, carrying on the tradition that our foreparents knew, right? In America, the way that communities have thrived is that minority communities have really invested in themselves, right? My grandparents lived in a different time period where white folks wouldn't come to their neighborhood. My dad even grew up in a segregated school. He did. My father. I also want to be buck some. People always oh, so many years ago. My father did not go to school with a white person until his senior year of high school. Okay, that's my dad, right? So that everything that they did, they had to build on their own. It was very insular, very similar to the Jewish community in America as well. So a Black community and a Jewish community coming together and kind of leaning into the ancestral ministry memory to birth something that will really give people the tools they need to succeed is what we're trying to do. I foresee it as creating a whole kind of social safety net for folks, and to really give them a footing and maybe even a step up on the ladder towards economic freedom, towards wholeness, and to spirituality. So we would love for folks to partner with us in this work, because it's going to take many hands to make this work. But can you just imagine, kids getting trained, or people who lost their jobs getting trained on the West Side and coming to work in South LA, people in South LA getting trained and working on the West Side, and who knows, maybe they create co-ops out of it, and we're able to help invest in those co-ops. Maybe we can build some new housing out of it, and that's affordable for folks, that for low-income folks, and let them move into it and keep the context of the neighborhood. Maybe, we're creating programs where folks are being educated around how to better manage their money or invest their funds. All those things will be needed, because what we saw after the first recession in '09 is that in the Black community, it took 4 or 5 years after the rest of the world recovered for Black communities to recover. Well, this is something we've never seen before. And that's why I see the motions on the city and county level realizing, oh, hold up. The federal government realizing, hold up. If we don't change course, there's no going back to normal. So we don't know what America or nightmares we're going to create.
And I love that. And, I think over the last 4 months, one of the most frustrating things is when I hear people say, I just can't wait for this to end so we can go back to how things were. And I think what we're saying right now is no, but because going back to how things were wasn't working, right? But this idea of our two communities coming together and saying, we're not going to go back to how things were. We're going to create something new. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna bridge that gap that is in Los Angeles. And we are going to provide this new social safety net and really bringing people together. And as the two of us know, there's a trust within the religious community. That there is a trust at the end of the day, they can come to us and we can try and make things better. Mm-hmm. And so, when we say, it's not just we're going to give a good sermon and we're not just going to have like a small program, but rather we're going to have this community-wide effort to recreate the economy here. I mean, that is really where, we are taking our texts and we are putting it into real time. And as I've said to people in the last few months after we started to work on creating this, I often hear, oh, I love seeing you in the streets, these diverse clergy in the streets marching together. It's so inspiring. And my response is, if you want to really see inspiration, watch what we're going to do over the next 2 to 3 years with this new corporation, because we are going to ensure that people are not just posting hashtags and walking away, but rather doing a deep investment into what really matters, and that's the future.
Absolutely. How do we, again, share the resources that we have, realizing that they never really belonged to us in the first place? And it's one thing, and I think this moment is different because previously it became PC and cool to say, oh, Black Lives Matter, or oh yeah, we believe in our Black brothers and sisters, and we'll go march with you. But when we go home, or I'm going back home to a neighborhood that's disinvested, and you're going home to a neighborhood that has all resources that it needs, and we're not sharing the resources and really investing the money. So how do we fill in the gap? We put in real investment, hard dollars, hard capital, putting in brick and mortar and the skills needed. So, we'll need money, and we need people who have expertise or space to help lend those spaces out so people can really feel they're okay. I'll say this, Joe. It was interesting. When Donald Trump got elected president, we should call him 45. So it's like one time I'm gonna say his name. When 45 got elected, Black Lives Matter did a protest, and they went to Steve Mnuchin's house. And he was driving to Steve Mnuchin's house, and we were on the buses, and folks said, "I've never been to the west side of LA." And they said, oh, wow, LA got this? Like, the people were so surprised. What does that mean for our city, right? That South LA, and I'll get off this soapbox in a second, but South LA, after the 92 uprising or riots, whatever you call it, the city came up with a plan. The South LA leaders said we needed $3 billion to recover in South LA. You know how much money South LA got? $400 million. So since 92, really, we've never really invested the money we needed in South LA to let the people of South LA take control of their destiny and create the community that they want to live in. I think it's time for us to do that.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, the transparency of living here on the west side of Los Angeles, right? And you know, not to generalize, but you know, so many of, I think, the opportunities and the blessings that we see, we have to admit that we're still living in a segregated moment and in a segregated city. And so much of the work that we have to do can't just be about posting on social media and can't just be about you know, calling out injustice over there. Mm-hmm. Right? But we really have to look deep into where we are and where we sit, and talking about true reallocation and true investment, and that this isn't going to take, like, this isn't going to get done in 6 months. And right. And you know, this isn't about, you know, just vote for the right candidate and everything is good. No, this is about deep investment and a radical change in how we live and in what we do and how we really look at a budget. And is that really the moral document that we hope to see? Mm-hmm. Pastor Eddie, it is always just an inspiring opportunity to talk with you and to learn with you and to be involved in justice and in the community with you. Do you have any final words that you want to say this morning? Because listen, we're going to be saying many, many words as we roll out this CDC mm-hmm. and the many opportunities we have for people. But do you have any final words or a final message you want to say this morning?
Well, I just want to thank you for your friendship and partnership, right? I think this really shows what it means to have hard conversations, to work together. I'm quite sure that we don't agree on everything, but we are still in this struggle together. And it just reminds me, like, I see T. Vivian, his funerals today, so he's in my mind. What I often say to us when we was at Morehouse is that the struggles that we choose define us. And I think me and you have chosen a struggle that we will work this thing out together and try to repair the harm between communities. And that's really how we get to the next step. That's really how we make sure that the sun continues to rise on all of us. And I'm just thankful for that work that we are able to do together and we can continue to do together, and for this opportunity and for the JCJ community. You know, you have a voice, you have privilege, you can use it. You could choose the struggle of freedom and justice, and I hope you all will, because that's what radical love looks like.
Well, first off, amen to all of that, and thank you. And it's not about hoping that we will, because you are going to hold us accountable, and you are going to keep reminding us of the voice that we have and the privilege that we have. And when we start to slack on that, I think our friendship and the transparency that we have with one another, you're going to remind us of that, because I think that's what true friendship is. It's about holding us accountable, and it's about being in this moment together. So I hope that you'll never pull your punches, and that we will continue just to be in this work, because it's easy to go back to business as usual when you have privilege, and we can't do that in this moment in time.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much, and more of these to come.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.